The night was colder than usual, a kind of cold that cuts through your skin and finds its way into your bones. Snow fell in thick sheets, covering the roads, trees, and roofs in silence. I was sitting near the window, watching the world disappear into white when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Harris, our next-door neighbor, her voice trembling. She said there was an old woman outside, sitting in the snow near the corner of our street. I didn't think much until she said, "I think it's your grandmother." My heart stopped for a moment. Grandma, but she was supposed to be with my mother. Mom had said earlier that day she was taking Grandma back to her place because she needed discipline, a cruel word she often used to cover her selfishness. I rushed outside without even grabbing a coat. The snow bit into my skin as I ran down the street. When I saw her, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, my grandmother, sitting in the snow in her nightgown, her thin shoulders shaking, her frail hands pressed to her chest. Her eyes looked glassy with confusion and tears frozen on her lashes. I dropped to my knees beside her, wrapping my arms around her small, trembling frame. "Grandma, it's me, Noah," I whispered. She looked up slowly, her lips blue. "She left me," she said softly. "She said I was no mother." I didn't need to ask who she meant. My mother. I carried her inside my car, cranked up the heat, and drove home as fast as I could. My mind was racing. How could my mother do this? Grandma had raised her alone after my grandfather died. She worked 2 jobs, sacrificed her health, and even sold her wedding ring so Mom could go to college. And now, this, to throw her into the snow like garbage. When we reached my apartment, I helped Grandma out of the car and wrapped her in warm blankets. She was shaking so badly I thought I'd have to call an ambulance, but after some soup and tea, she began to breathe more steadily. She kept murmuring, she said I ruined her life. She said I was never a real mother. I couldn't hold back my tears. I texted my mom, furious. "How could you do that to her? She's freezing." I didn't get a reply for an hour. When she finally called, her voice was filled with fake calmness. "She doesn't belong here, Noah. You don't understand. She's not the person you think she is." I shouted at her, "She's your mother. You left her to die in the snow." Mom hung up. For the next few days, I took care of Grandma. She was weak, but she smiled sometimes, telling me little stories from her childhood. Stories about my mother when she was young, about their small home, about how hard she tried to give her daughter a better life. She never said a bad word about her, even after what happened. That's what broke me the most. Then one evening, I found something strange. While helping Grandma to bed, she asked me to get her a shawl from her old suitcase. Inside, beneath some clothes, I found a faded envelope with my mother's name written on it. It was unopened. I hesitated but showed it to Grandma. Her eyes widened. She never opened it, she whispered. I asked her what it was, and she sighed deeply. "It's the truth," she said. "I was never her real mother." My stomach tightened. She explained how, decades ago, she had adopted my mother secretly after my real grandmother, her sister, had died giving birth. She had kept it from her for years to protect her. But when my mother found out a few months ago, she accused Grandma of lying, of stealing her life, and cut all ties. I sat there speechless. Suddenly my mother's cruel words made sense. Her anger, her coldness, her bitterness. But even then, nothing justified what she did. Grandma looked at me with tired eyes. "She may hate me, but I still love her. She's my child, even if not by blood." I promised her she would never be alone again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about how love could twist into hate when truth was buried too long. The next morning, my mother showed up at my door. Her eyes were red from crying. "Is she here?" she asked, voice trembling. I didn't want to let her in, but Grandma, sitting quietly in her chair, nodded. "Let her come." Mom walked in, and for a long moment, she just stood there, staring at the woman she once called Mom. Then she broke down. "Why didn't you tell me?" she cried. Grandma smiled weakly. "Because I wanted you to feel loved, not abandoned." My mother fell to her knees, sobbing. The silence of the room was filled with decades of pain, love, and misunderstanding. I watched as Grandma reached out and touched her hair gently, whispering, "You were always my daughter." After that night when I found Grandma freezing in the snow, everything changed in our lives. I took her in, cared for her like she once cared for everyone else. She became the heart of my home, her quiet presence bringing warmth to the coldest corners of my days. My mother, on the other hand, refused to speak to me. She called once, shouting that I was being manipulated, that Grandma had fooled everyone for years. But I had seen the truth in Grandma's trembling hands and tearful eyes. There was no manipulation, only heartbreak. Weeks passed, and slowly Grandma's health improved. She loved sitting by the window, knitting scarves for the homeless and humming old songs. Sometimes, she'd pause mid-song, lost in thought, her gaze distant. When I asked what she was thinking, she'd smile sadly and say, "I'm just remembering the good days, when your mother used to dance in the living room." Her memories were like broken pieces of glass, beautiful but sharp enough to hurt when you looked too closely. One day, Grandma called me into her room. She was sitting with a box in her lap, worn and tied with faded ribbon. "It's time you know everything," she said. Inside were old letters, photographs, and a small diary. She told me that years ago, before I was born, my mother had gotten into deep trouble, something that could have destroyed her future. Grandma had taken the blame for it. I couldn't believe it. She had gone to court, faced humiliation, and carried that burden alone so her daughter could have a clean life. But instead of gratitude, my mother grew resentful. The lie that saved her reputation also made her feel trapped in guilt, and over time, that guilt twisted into anger. When the truth about her adoption came out, it shattered whatever was left of her love for Grandma. She couldn't forgive me, Grandma whispered. Not for loving her too much. Not for keeping her safe when she wanted to face her own mistakes. As she spoke, tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. I held her hand, realizing how much she had suffered silently while trying to protect a family that never appreciated her sacrifices. I promised her I would never let her feel unwanted again. But fate had other plans. A few weeks later, Grandma fell ill. Her heart was weak, and the doctor said she needed rest. I stayed by her side, making soup, reading to her, and listening to her soft stories. Late one night, she asked me to write something down. "If anything happens to me," she said gently, "give this to your mother." It was a letter. She signed it with shaking hands and smiled. Maybe she'll finally understand. Grandma passed away quietly 2 days later, in her sleep, her hands folded neatly on her chest. I sat by her bed, tears streaming down my face, feeling both peace and heartbreak. She had left this world with forgiveness in her heart, even for the one who had abandoned her. I called my mother, voice trembling, and told her the news. There was silence on the other end, and then a choked sob. She didn't say anything else, just hung up. I didn't expect her to come to the funeral, but she did. When she arrived, everyone turned to look. Dressed in black, eyes red and swollen, she looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way I had never seen her. She didn't speak to anyone. During the service, she stood in front of Grandma's coffin and whispered something under her breath, her lips trembling. Afterward, I handed her the letter. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. I watched as she read, tears falling onto the paper. Then she covered her mouth and cried like a child. After a few minutes, she looked at me and said, "She forgave me, after everything I did." Her voice broke. I nodded silently. That evening, my mother and I sat together for the first time in years. She told me things I never knew, that her anger wasn't just toward Grandma but also toward herself. She hated that she couldn't love her properly, that she had let bitterness poison her heart. "I thought she ruined my life," she said quietly. "But she was the only one who ever saved it." From that day, something changed in her. She started visiting the small park where Grandma used to sit, leaving flowers by the bench every Sunday. Sometimes, she'd talk to her softly, as if Grandma were still listening. I often watched from a distance, feeling the strange mix of sorrow and peace that came with seeing her finally break and heal at the same time. Months passed. Winter melted into spring. The snow that once buried Grandma in cold was now replaced by blooming flowers. Life moved on, but the lessons she left behind never faded. She had taught us both the meaning of love that endures beyond anger, forgiveness that heals even the deepest wounds, and strength that asks for nothing in return. One evening, as I walked past the park, I saw my mother sitting on the same bench, a small smile on her face. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." For the first time, her voice didn't carry bitterness, it carried peace.